The night my brother announced he was cutting me out of the house, he did it between the salad course and the entree. The way you'd mention traffic or a change in weekend plans. "We've made a decision about Mom's property," he said, setting down his fork with the kind of deliberate calm that only people who've rehearsed a conversation can manage. "Given everything with Natalie's practice, it makes more sense for us to take the house outright. You're doing well, Leah. You don't need it the way we do." My mother was at the head of the table stirring her iced tea, not looking at me. My sister-in-law Natalie was cutting her chicken into very small, careful pieces. I set my own fork down, not dramatically. Just set it down because my hands had gone somewhere between numb and electric, and I didn't trust them. That house in Naperville wasn't just a house. It was the reason I had spent 4 years driving 90 minutes each way every weekend, managing contractors, sitting on hold with the insurance company, cleaning out the gutters when my brother was in Scottsdale for a real estate conference. My mother had a degenerative hip condition that had been worsening since I was 26. She couldn't do the stairs alone by year 3. I had been the one there, every single time. When she updated her estate plan 2 years ago, she had called me specifically to tell me the house would come to both of us equally, my brother Garrett and me, half and half. She had said it the way people say things they consider settled, the way you'd confirm a flight time. "Mom," I said. Just her name, a question and a statement at the same time. She finally looked at me. "You're a nurse practitioner, Leah. You have a salary. Garrett and Natalie have overhead. The practice is struggling." Garrett's orthodontic practice in Scottsdale had been struggling for the better part of a decade, which somehow never prevented them from a ski trip in February or a summer rental on Lake Havasu. I had a salary, yes. I also had $41,000 in student loans and a 1-bedroom apartment in Evanston, where the radiator knocked every night from October to April. "I want to see the new documents," I said. Garrett smiled. It was the smile he had been perfecting since we were children, the one that said I was being difficult, emotional, unreasonable, that I was making a scene over nothing. "There's nothing to see yet. We're just aligning on intentions." "Aligning on intentions," I repeated it slowly. "You mean you've decided to take my half of the inheritance and you wanted to tell me over dinner so I wouldn't make a scene?" Natalie put down her fork. "That's a really uncharitable way to frame a family conversation." I looked at my mother again. She had gone back to stirring her iced tea. I left before dessert. I drove home in the dark with the windows down even though it was 40 degrees because I needed the cold on my face to think clearly. I told myself it was just talk. I told myself nothing had been signed. I told myself nothing had been signed. I told myself I had time. I had underestimated my brother completely. By the following Thursday, I had a voicemail from my mother's estate attorney, not asking me to come in, not inviting discussion, just a notification that the beneficiary designations had been updated and the property transfer on death deed had been amended. The house, the full property, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, and a lot worth roughly $580,000 in the current market, now transferred entirely to Garrett Robert Holloway upon my mother's death. My name had been removed. Not reduced. Removed. I called the attorney back the same afternoon. He was pleasant and brief. The changes had been made at my mother's instruction. She was of sound mind and body. There was nothing legally irregular. He suggested, gently, that if I had concerns about undue influence, I was welcome to consult my own attorney. That phrase, undue influence, sat with me for a long time after I hung up. I wasn't ready to use it. It felt too clinical, too adversarial. I was still, stupidly, trying to protect the idea that my family was something salvageable. I called my mother that night. She answered on the second ring, which surprised me. "I need to understand what happened," I said. "Garrett explained the situation to me," she said. "I agree with him. You're stable. You have your career. He needs the foundation more than you do." Word for word, the exact phrasing, "You're stable. You don't need it the way he does." They had coached her. Whether it had happened over one conversation or 20, I couldn't know. but the language was identical. I recognized it now as a script. Mom, I've been there every weekend for 4 years. I managed every contractor. I was there when you had your hip replacement. I drove you to every follow-up appointment. You were doing what any good daughter would do, she said. That shouldn't come with a price tag. I didn't have a response for that. The silence stretched between us, and then she said she was tired and she hung up. I sat on my bathroom floor for a while, not crying exactly, just trying to locate something steady inside me and not finding it. Then I got up because I'm a nurse practitioner and I have a clinical habit of moving through crisis toward the next practical action. I needed information before I could do anything else. I started with what I knew. My mother had updated her documents, but the house had originally been designated equally between Garrett and me in an estate plan drawn up 3 years ago, and I was listed as her healthcare proxy and had been managing her medical care under an informal understanding. Garrett lived in Arizona. He visited at Christmas and sometimes Easter. He had contributed exactly nothing to her daily care. I pulled out every document I had access to. My own copies of the original estate plan, the summary the attorney had sent me when it was finalized, the email chain where my mother had explicitly confirmed the equal split. I photographed everything and stored it in a cloud drive with a password that had nothing to do with my name or birthday. Then I called a friend from graduate school who had gone into elder law. Not to hire her, just to understand the landscape. She talked to me for 40 minutes off the record. She used the phrase undue influence 3 times. She told me what to look for. She also told me to be careful about what I said to my brother. I was careful. For 11 days, I was careful. I responded to Garrett's occasional texts with neutral, brief replies. I visited my mother twice and brought her soup and didn't mention the house. I was gathering, not confronting. What I found when I started looking properly unraveled something much worse than I had expected. Garrett's practice wasn't just troubling, it was hemorrhaging. I had access to a shared family email account we'd set up years ago for coordinating mom's care, and he had never thought to remove his automatic billing alerts from it. I watched 3 months of overdraft notices, a default warning from his equipment financing company, and a letter from an Illinois bank about a personal guarantee he'd signed on a commercial loan. But the detail that stalked me cold was a filing I found through the Illinois Secretary of State's business search tool. A new LLC had been formed 4 months ago. Holloway Family Holdings, LLC, listed as a real estate holding company. The registered agent was Natalie. My mother was listed as a passive investor. She hadn't mentioned this to me. Not once. I dug deeper. The LLC had been capitalized, meaning someone had put money into it to get it started. The amount wasn't visible in the public filing, but there was a corresponding quitclaim deed filed with DuPage County. My mother had transferred the Naperville property into the LLC 3 weeks ago, before the formal estate plan update, as a capital contribution. She hadn't just changed who would inherit the house, she had already given it away. And if the LLC had debt, which, given Garrett's financial situation, seemed extraordinarily likely, the house could be collateral. It could be liquidated to cover his creditors. My mother could end up with nothing, living in a property she technically no longer owned, while Garrett used it to bridge his tractor's debt. I sat with that knowledge for 2 days. I kept going back to the county recorder's website, refreshing the deed record like it might change. It didn't change. I thought about calling him. I played out the conversation in my head every possible way, and every version ended the same. He would deny, deflect, and then use whatever I said against me. I had watched him do it my entire life. He was charming and fast, and he had been managing my mother's perception of me for longer than I'd realized. So instead, I called the county's Adult Protective Services line and asked, hypothetically, carefully, what protections existed for elderly homeowners who had transferred property under circumstances that might involve financial influence by a family member. The woman on the line was matter of fact. She gave me a phone number for the Illinois Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit. She told me that quitclaim deeds could be challenged if evidence of undue influence existed, particularly if the elder showed signs of cognitive decline or was dependent on the influencing party for care. My mother was dependent on me for care. The irony was so precise, it felt almost designed. I hired an attorney the following Monday. Not my friend from grad school, someone with no connection to my life, a woman named Patricia who specialized in contested estate matters and had the kind of quiet confidence that comes from having seen everything. I laid out everything I had. The original estate documents, the emails, the LLC filing, the quitclaim deed, the overdraft notices, and a timeline I had written out showing my 4 years of caregiving and Garrett's physical absence. She read it all without interrupting me. Then she said, "You have a viable undue influence claim. But I want to be honest with you. These cases are slow, expensive, and hard on families. Are you prepared for that?" I said yes before she finished the sentence. What happened next was the part I hadn't planned for. Garrett found out I had hired an attorney. I still don't know how. Possibly through the estate lawyer who had a courtesy obligation to notify my mother, and his response was immediate and overwhelming. Within a week, I received a certified letter from his attorney stating that I had been harassing my mother, making accusations of elder abuse against a loving son, and causing her significant emotional distress. The letter threatened a defamation suit. It also included, as an exhibit, a letter my mother had allegedly written, describing me as controlling, obsessive about the house, and prone to emotional instability since my father's death. My father had died 11 years ago. I had been 22. I had, in fact, struggled for a year after that. I'd seen a therapist. I had been honest about it on a form somewhere at some point, and Garrett had clearly found that information and filed it for later use. I read the letter twice, then I forwarded it to Patricia. She called me within the hour. "He's scared," she said. "This letter is a pressure tactic. It's meant to make you feel like the cost of continuing is too high. The question is whether it's working." "It's not working," I said. 2 days later, my brother called me directly for the first time since the dinner. "Leah, this is getting out of hand," he said, his voice measured and warm in the way it always was when he wanted something. "Mom is upset. She's not sleeping. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Why don't we get on a call, the three of us, and figure out something reasonable?" "What does reasonable look like to you, Garrett?" "Maybe a cash settlement. Something fair, given your contributions. We're not trying to cut you out entirely." That phrase landed hard. "We're not trying to cut you out entirely," as opposed to what exactly? What they had already done? "Send me a number," I said. He sent $18,000 for 4 years of weekend labor, medical management, and half the value of a $580,000 property. $18,000. I didn't respond. I brought it to Patricia instead, and she added it to the file as evidence that Garrett was aware his position was indefensible and was attempting to settle before discovery. The case moved forward, slowly, the way Patricia had warned me. My mother was deposed. It was the hardest day of the entire process, watching her answer questions from a stranger about her own decisions, seeing her look to the corner of the room where Garrett's attorney sat, checking his expression before she answered. She wasn't incapable. She wasn't diagnosed with anything, but she was 71 years old, and she had been living inside my brother's version of reality for long enough that she had stopped questioning it. The depositions also surfaced something neither I nor Patricia had fully anticipated. Garrett's practice had taken a line of credit against the LLC. The Naperville house was listed as collateral. He had done it 6 weeks after the quitclaim deed, before the ink was fully dry on his mother's gift. The amount was $310,000. If Garrett defaulted, and given the overdraft pattern, it was a question of when, not if, a creditor could foreclose on the house. My mother could lose her home. She could be left with nothing while living in a property that had been used to cover her son's failed business debts. When Patricia presented that to my mother's attorney and to my mother directly, separate from Garrett's presence, something shifted. I don't know exactly what was said in that room. I wasn't there. But my mother's attorney withdrew from the case 3 days later, citing a conflict of interest, and my mother called me that evening for the first time in 4 months. She didn't apologize exactly. She said, I didn't understand what he had done with the house. I said, I know, Mom. He told me it was a tax strategy. I said, I know. There was a long pause and then she said, what happens now? What happened was this. The quitclaim deed was challenged and, given the evidence of financial pressure and the absence of independent legal counsel for my mother at the time of signing, the DuPage County Court voided the transfer. The house reverted to my mother's estate. The LLC was dissolved when the collateral was removed and the line of credit called. Garrett's practice filed for Chapter 11 2 months later. My mother updated her estate plan again, this time with Patricia present for the signing and a separate patient advocate in the room. The house is split equally between Garrett and me as it was originally intended, though Garrett's half is protected by a spendthrift provision that prevents him from using it as collateral or transferring it without court approval. He hasn't spoken to me since the deposition. I don't expect he will for a long time. Natalie sent me a text 3 weeks after the court ruling. It said, you destroyed our family for a house. I read it and set my phone face down on my kitchen counter and made a cup of coffee and thought about that for a while. I didn't destroy anything. I just refused to let them finish what they started. My mother's hip is worse this winter. I drove down to Naperville last Saturday and we watched a movie together and I made the lemon chicken she likes, the kind with the capers, and we didn't talk about any of it. She fell asleep in her chair before the credits. I turned off the TV and covered her with the blanket from the back of the couch, the one she's had since before I was born, the one with the small burn mark near the corner from a candle incident in 1987 that she never stopped telling the story of. I stood in that living room for a minute, in the quiet, looking at the familiar shapes of everything. The side table my grandfather made, the ceramic lamp she found at an estate sale the summer I was 12. The framed photo of my father on the wall that I grew up thinking was just decoration until I was old enough to understand it was a vigil. This is what I had been protecting. Not an asset, not equity, not a number in an estate calculation. I started my own financial planning practice last spring. Small, just me and one part-time associate, working out of a shared office space near my apartment. The first client I signed was a woman my mother's age whose children had been helping her manage her accounts for 3 years and whose retirement savings had somehow evaporated in the process. I knew exactly what questions to ask her. The sign on my office door is simple, just my name. But every morning when I open it, I think about what it cost to get there, and I'm not ashamed of the cost anymore. Some things are worth the fight. Some tables are worth the burn. I just wish someone had told me earlier that the hardest part isn't standing up. It's staying standing when the people who are supposed to love you keep trying to knock you back down. They wanted me grateful and quiet. They got the truth instead. The truth, it turns out, is a very effective estate planning tool. I've thought a lot about what made the difference, not just legally, but in the deeper sense of how things ended up the way they did. Garrett is smart. He has always been the kind of person who reads a room fast and figures out the angle. And for years, that worked for him because I wasn't playing an angle. I was just showing up, driving down on Saturdays, sitting in waiting rooms, filling out the insurance paperwork nobody else wanted to touch. I wasn't doing it to build a case or earn points. I was doing it because my mother needed someone and I was the one who was there. That's not virtue. That's just what you do when you love someone. But here's what I've come to understand. The choices we make when nobody's watching are exactly the choices that matter most when everything falls apart. I didn't keep records of my caregiving because I was planning a lawsuit. I kept them because I'm organized and because I take things seriously. I didn't save those emails about the original estate split because I was suspicious. I saved them because that's how I handle important information. None of it was strategic. It was just consistent. Garrett, on the other hand, had spent so many years cutting corners and managing perception that he had forgotten the thing about shortcuts. They tend to leave a trail. The LLC filing, the quitclaim deed, the line of credit against a house that wasn't legally his to pledge. Every move he made to secure his advantage created a document somewhere, and documents don't lie the way people do. That's what I mean when I think about cause and effect in a life. Not in any mystical sense, just the plain factual reality that actions accumulate. What you build over years, whether it's integrity or debt, whether it's trust or resentment, eventually becomes the structure you're standing on when something shakes the ground. I also learned something about what it costs to stay quiet. I had been quietly accommodating my family's hierarchy for most of my adult life, letting Garrett be the charming one, letting my mother believe he was more financially precarious than me and therefore more deserving of help. I told myself that was being the bigger person. Looking back, it was something closer to self-erasure. I had made myself small enough that they stopped seeing me as someone who would push back. The moment I hired Patricia and said out loud that what had been done to me was wrong, that single act changed the entire dynamic. Not because of the legal process that followed, but because I had finally stopped participating in the fiction. There's something I want to say to anyone sitting with a similar situation right now, weighing whether the fight is worth it. The cost of staying silent isn't neutrality, it's endorsement. Every time you absorb an injustice without naming it, you teach the people around you that it's acceptable. And you teach yourself that your own interests don't matter. They do matter. You matter. My mother is still my mother. I made lemon chicken for her last Saturday, and she fell asleep in her chair, and I covered her with that old blanket, and I felt nothing but tenderness. The legal battle didn't take that from me. What it gave me back was the ability to be in that room without resentment quietly rotting underneath everything. That, more than the house, more than the equal split, more than any dollar amount, that's what I was really fighting for.